These are the two most Southern questions. Where are you from? Who are your people? And growing up, I didn't know Atlanta. When your daddy's a preacher, you belong everywhere and nowhere. So 10 years ago, my fiance Maggie and I are flipping channels, and we stumble upon Henry Louis Gates' show on PBS, Finding Your Roots. And your ancestors are in purgatory, Gates said, waiting to be discovered. It was clearly a sign. I almost jumped off the couch, and I said, this is it. I'm going to teach this next semester at UGA. The class will be exactly like the show, and we'll use these same tools, DNA tests and digital archives, to solve family mysteries. You know you're not Italian, Maggie said. Your last name is Simrill, not Simril. It was one of those funny names that you had to spell almost every time you said it, Simrill. But I didn't argue because in a couple of months, the name would be hers. The name was given to me. For Maggie, it was a choice. 2 weeks later, there's silence in the classroom as 20 college freshmen pour through archival documents, the majority written in cursive. Cursive. These kids can actually read cursive when they want to. In the University of South Carolina's archive, I found my great-grandfather's yearbook from 1916 and was surprised to see his last name, my last name, spelled with one L, Simril. Frank Simril was a football star for the Gamecocks during the Jim Crow era. When I ran Simril through Google Books, I was horrified, absolutely horrified to find our family's name in the local newspaper. It's midnight, May 5th, 1871. Reverend Elias Hill, a paralyzed preacher, educator, and voting rights advocate, is lifted from his bed by 6 Klansmen in homemade gowns. In York County, South Carolina, blacks and whites are equally numbered. The Klan lost the last election, and not again. In the yard, the Klansmen took turns whipping Elias Hill's back and shriveled limbs. They then dragged him by his neck with a belt towards the nearby water. They were going to drown him until one Klansman yelled, "Stop! Elias Hill can live if he renounces politics." That Klansman was Tom Simril, my 18-year-old great-great-grandfather. No one really talks about that moment when you first realize that you are white or black, Toni Morrison says. I was 37 when I first realized that I was white. And I mean really realized, and it was sickening to know that your freedom had come at someone else's expense. Yes, Tom Simril did save Elias Hill's life, but he was no white savior. Tom Simril beat a crippled man within inches of death, a man that he had known since childhood. I closed my laptop and paced the confines of my office. They say the truth will set you free, but what if the truth is that you are descended from people who owned and in at least one case terrorized human beings? How do you square that story within yourself? How do you pass that along to your children? Now you can imagine this jolt of shock and fear that I faced when I received a friend suggestion on Facebook for Michael Simril, a black man my same age with the name spelled Simril, the original spelling. Michael was from Rock Hill, South Carolina, just like my dad. He went to Rock Hill High School, just like my dad. And I studied Michael's vibe, his aura, and it was all intensely familiar. And it wasn't just Michael who resonated, it was his whole family. The Black Simrils went clubbing together on Saturday night and then to church on Sunday morning. They had swag for days and drip for death. And they were tough. One dude had Simril tattooed across his back in old English letters. And the Sim and the Rill were perfectly balanced across his traps. And my hand was shaking over the button for add friend, but I could not press it. Had my ancestors enslaved Michaels? With a name like Simril, probably so. And if so, would Michael want to know me? I mean, if I was him, would I? I don't think I would. I needed to step back and learn the whole story. In 1860, Tom Simril's father, Hugh Simril, owned and enslaved 26 people in York County along the waters of Allison Creek. The family was doing well materially. Most of the enslaved were kin to Reverend Elias Hill. Had Elias not contracted polio at 7 years old, he too would have belonged to the Simrils. But Elias had a plan. His favorite verse in scripture was Psalm 68. Princes shall come out of Egypt, and Ethiopia shall soon stretch its hand out to God. He was like a 19th century Bob Marley or Marcus Garvey. And 6 months after his horrible beating and near drowning, Elias Hill and 17 newly freed Simrils, 244 passengers in total, boarded a ship for Liberia, West Africa, to seek the American dream in their African homeland. After 40 days at sea, they saw a flag that looked just like the United States, except for one single star for Africa's first republic. Around the same time, Elias Hill's niece, Harriet Simril, traveled 90 miles from York County to Columbia to testify against the Ku Klux Klan in federal court. For the first time in history, African Americans could serve on juries. They could testify against whites. And Harriet's heroism helped convict 4 Klan leaders and drive the first Klan from South Carolina. This, I thought, was the greatest unknown journey of Black liberation. And I wondered if Michael and the Black Simrils knew about it, because it wasn't in history books, this family connection. There was an essential link that I found in my family's records, newly digitized on ancestry.com. I believe truth must precede reconciliation, which is why it is essential for white descendants of slaveholders to know their history and to share their findings. Reparations begins at home. After several months of research, I sent a letter, not only to Michael, but to everyone in the Carolinas with a variation of the Simril name. No one responded. And I wasn't surprised, and to be honest, a part of me was relieved. Perhaps the letter was too painful. Perhaps it was too close to home. A week later, my dad and I made some phone calls Simril, who? I think you have the wrong number every time. Finally, we got someone on the line. It was Michael's mom, Rita. And it turned out that she and Michael's aunties had been asking the same questions about the Simril name and legacy. And they too had even joked that we were Italian. Take the gun, leave the Simrilis. And so as these good vibes continued, we started planning a family picnic at my great aunt's farm in York County. 50 Simrils on each side. Fried chicken, barbecue, catfish, collard greens. I was thrilled and terrified. March 22nd, 2014, the second day of spring. It was perfect weather, kind of like today or yesterday, when spring at last arrives in the Carolinas. We had this amazing soundtrack, Booker T and the MGs. Under the shade of pecan trees, my Aunt Nancy placed a bouquet of daffodils on each table. And I looked around and it was idyllic, and yet there was something heavy inside. Some of the Black Simrils had declined our invitation, and I hoped that those who were coming would not change their minds. I was putting drinks in the cooler when all of a sudden this caravan of clean, tricked out cars rolled up as if in slow motion. The engine from this Mustang 5.0 was so loud you could hardly hear Booker T's Hammond B3 organ. And everybody just stopped what they were doing. The cars parked, and then the Black Simrils emerged with a glide in their stride, a dip in their hip, and obvious pride. So there we were, whites on one side and blacks on the other. And then at the same moment, we stepped forward and hugged. We hugged and quickly intermingled. William Faulkner, in his novel Absalom, Absalom, says that when people touch, when flesh presses flesh, all false notions of race or caste dissolve. We may spell our name differently, but at the core, we the Simrils are one people. We all marveled at how much we looked alike. Same eyes, same cheekbones, same mischievous smile. As the sun set behind the pine trees, we gathered for a new family portrait. And on that Saturday in March, we all sensed that we were living Dr. King's dream. When the sons and daughters of slaves and slaveholders join hands at the table of brotherhood, we become the best versions of ourselves, releasing whites from guilt and blacks from resentment. But of the 100 people gathered at the Simrill reunion, Michael and I and our brothers were the only ones who shared the Simrill last name. The others could ignore the legacy, but not us. We did play basketball together. We went to music festivals. We celebrated Halloween together in Athens, Georgia. We beat on the drum at Pritchard Park in downtown Asheville. Our sons even started a book club together with Dog Man and Captain Underpants. This alternate parallel universe that I'd imagined became more and more real. We even recorded a conversation with NPR StoryCorps and a podcast through Audible with an original soundtrack produced by T-Bone Burnett. Whenever possible, Michael and I would attend historical reenactments together in York County. And the more we talked to other people, the more we realized that we, the Simrils, were not alone. In 1860, 46% of families in South Carolina enslaved human beings. A recent Reuters study found that 100 legislators and 4 living presidents are descended from slaveholders. Michael and I agree that we could not change the past, but we could amend the present. Our goal was to create an historical marker for Elias and Harriet to honor their testimony against the Ku Klux Klan and escape to Liberia. But there was an obvious problem. Did people want this marker? I mean, in South Carolina, there were 300 markers to the Confederacy and 0 to the Ku Klux Klan, its paramilitary army. It seemed that public sentiment and logistics were against us. In South Carolina, you can only create a marker for an event or a place, not for a person. And in 1904, a dam was created, and Elias and Harriet, their homes were now probably underwater. But another search through property records revealed this. Before immigrating to Liberia in July 1871, Reverend Elias Hill sold 40 acres of land to the Simrill family on Allison Creek. So we now knew where Elias and Harriet had lived in America, but not where they settled in Liberia. So Michael and I prepared a trip to the motherland, to Africa. We had our shots, our visas, our Blu-ray copies of Roots and The Lion King. Hakuna Matata. Can you feel the love tonight? In Arlington, Liberia, we would meet with Michael's relatives who were still recovering from their own civil war. Alas, Liberia's dream proved just as elusive as America's. The past, it seemed, was never past. And then 2 weeks before our trip, Michael was forced to cancel when his family needed him at home. Michael's African relatives viewed me with suspicion. When I arrived in Arlington at the mayor's office on this plateau overlooking the St. Paul River, but when I showed them photos of our families together and photos of their town before it was burned in the Civil War, they led me down South Carolina Road to Elias Hill's family cemetery, where we joined hands in prayer. 2 months later, we unveiled the historical marker for Elias and Harriet at Allison Creek Presbyterian Church, where white Simrills once worshiped in pews and black Simrills in the slave balcony. We shared the communion cup with Liberian Simrills. You can see them on the left, who traveled thousands of miles to walk the path of their ancestors. Michael, I think we need to come out and end this together, man. That's right. In 1860, Michael's ancestor, a blacksmith named Solomon Hill, received the highest valuation in the Simrill estate, $3,000. 30 years later, he was the coffee king of Liberia, its richest citizen. And Solomon Hill said, when I found out how much I was worth to my boss, I decided to be worth even more to myself. As this black velvet cloth was removed from the marker, his great-granddaughter led us in the singing of Amazing Grace. So it's been 10 years now since the first Simrill reunion. And my children are 7 years old. Maggie blessed us with twins, with boy-girl twins. And they were so excited yesterday when Michael and his mom, Rita, came to town for my dad's birthday and to celebrate our podcast launch. And they played ping pong and pool together. And at night, we were reading a story, and then my daughter said, "How did you beat Michael?" And I looked at the clock, and I was like, man, it's too late to rehearse this TED Talk. I said, it's an incredible story, and I'm going to tell you tomorrow. We may have a long way to go, but we know that for we, the Simrills, the one L and the two L's, that we are better together. And I'm so grateful for your love. I'm so grateful for your presence here today. There's this song by Jimmy Castor and the Funky Bunch. It's called It's Just Begun, because it's just begun.